Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, I have Erin Rapacki from San Francisco. And Erin, you're with Suitable Technologies, makers of the Beam.
Yes, hello. We make the Beam Smart Presence System. As you may have seen it as the video conferencing device that drives itself around, and we enable people to be everywhere they need to be.
I love it. And on the LinkedIn site or on the website, it says Suitable Technologies develops products for people to live and work remotely. So
We find that very valuable. The way Beam started was from a remote engineer. It started in 2009. A remote engineer, electrical engineer, lived in Indiana, the middle of the U.S., and he was working for a company who was based in California. And he was somewhat frustrated of being a remote employee, not being able to wrangle everybody in the same room, or not being able to see the demos of the hardware that he was actively working on. So one of his business trips, he decided to build one of these telepresence devices out of spare robot parts. And that actually was put on the show Big Bang Theory in 2010 as Shellbot. So this remote engineer went from one of the least known people in the company to the most known people in that organization. And the team decided to spin off to commercialize it and turn it into a product.
oh, I love how he just has off-the-shelf robot parts. Like, we all do.
Of course.
Of course. Well, that's awesome. And so now I'm interested in terms of the Beam, we'll get more into the Beam in a bit, but what I'm interested in is what does the Beam team office look like? How do you guys work together as a team?
As you may imagine, we have the freedom to hire a lot of remote employees. So a lot of our staff don't live in California. In fact, some of our engineers decided to move away to Colorado because it didn't matter, or move away to another state because it was more affordable. We recruited our creative director. He lives in Detroit. So many of these remote people, they have a beam that somewhat belongs to them in our building. So as you walk through our headquarters, there are desks, there are people sitting at the desks, and there are beams basically next to every desk. There are beams everywhere. Many of our remote staff are encouraged to stay logged into the beam all day as they're working. And this is so people can find them or somewhat stroll up next to them. So like strolling to somebody at their desk, people will stroll up to their beam and say, hey, we got this thing we're working on. A lot of our remote employees are software engineers, and they'll actually do somewhat of their pair programming and collaboration with a beam next to somebody at their desk. And it's been really valuable because it's given, as you may imagine, we have demos and opportunities and customers all over the country. So we encourage our sales and marketing reps to live as far apart from each other around the country as possible. So I have a colleague in New York, I have a colleague in San Diego, I have a colleague in Seattle. We need to find someone in Florida. That'll be helpful. But if there's ever a demo in those regions, we got somebody who lives there and can support it. And our teams and our team meetings are literally half the room may be people in the flesh, but the other half of attendants are in beams.
Cool. That sounds wonderful, actually. So I'm just imagining this office with half beams, half people rolling around, collaborating. And so, it sounds really interesting. What really works about that situation?
I think it's the one-to-one representation and the fact that it's easy to use. So in many of the use cases, when you're looking at a video conferencing, a big room system, you want a lot of people talking to a lot of people, but it's not really that fluid, it's not really that spontaneous, and it's not really that empowering or instigating. So because one of our remote employees has full 24/7 access to a beam in the office, when they're remote, or when people are away on business travel, or next week I'm going to go work remotely from the East Coast because I'm going to go spend time with family. I love having that option. As I'm working, I'm going to keep a beam window open on my computer and still be part of the office culture. So they download the software on their computers, Windows or Mac, very flexible, and then they proactively log into the beam in the place they want to go, and then they can drive around. They can drive to the desk of the person they need to speak to. They can go drive into the factory space or the cafeteria is something people do. Some remote employees just want to go hang out with everybody at lunch. And the FaceTime really does help bring the team together a lot closer.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see how that would really work actually, because you have the movement and, like you said, the one-on-one representation. That's a very interesting a part of that. So what doesn't work? What's hard for your team about this situation?
I'd say it works best when there's a hub and a spoke. So when there's a hub of activity in an office or in a headquarters, when there's a building where most of the activity is happening or occurring, or if something needs to be seen, like a factory or a contract manufacturer, uh, the beam should be placed where there's a central hub of activity and people. And the remote employees or the people who are traveling are considered spokes. So if there's a place where everybody wishes they could be, then Beam is a great option to bring the people who are contractors or vendors or remote employees or people who might have to stay home sick. They can all visit the center of activity. Where it doesn't work so well, where video chat works, is when the entire team is distributed and there's no central office.
Right.
I said Beam works best when there's a central office or building where all the action is happening.
And what about in situations where you have two teams working in different locations? So, it's not everybody remote, but it's two different offices that are remote. What kind of situations do you see there?
That still works really well because you're talking about a place. So one of our customers, Square, has beams in their Tokyo, New York, and San Francisco offices. And so their team is evenly split between these three locations. So if any individual wants to proactively talk to any individual on their team, similar to walking up to their desk down the hall, they'll beam into Tokyo or beam into New York and visit the team as if they're there on the same floor.
Awesome. Awesome. And who are the people that are using this the most right now? I mean, I know museums. The medical field is always something that gets written about when people are talking about the beam. Where I also heard of a kid. I can't remember which podcast I was listening to. It was either This American Life or Where There's Smoke. But there was a kid who wasn't able to go to public school, and so he used Beam in order to go to school, and went to prom and had sort of a semi-normal life, even though he was confined to home. But so okay, so now I'm describing all the use cases. But what else? What else are people using it for?
A lot of our customers, the people who really need it, it's people who need that expert, the best person for the job instantly. So a lot of people, let's say you have a knowledge base, you have a remote worker, you have an employee, or you have a consultant that needs to, and you really want that person looking at the issue right away, but they're not available. It's going to take them a day to fly out. And so they sometimes compromise on the type of person they have helping them with the situation. And so being able to bring in the right person at the right time has been very interesting to a lot of people. A lot of our customers are executives or VPs or managers who business travel a lot. We love business travelers because what they do is they keep the beam back at their headquarters. And when they're at the hotel or when they're at a coffee shop or before a customer meeting, they'll use the beam to log in to kind of keep up with the home team, see what's going on. In fact, one of our customers is using it as a sales tool. He has a factory in China. So he has the beam at his factory in China. Not only can he have a daily operational meeting, but he's in a business where people are somewhat suspicious that he's white labeling his products. He's buying it from somebody else and putting his sticker on it. So he reassures customers by giving them a factory tour over the beam that, there's my logo on the wall. There's your products being made right now. Hey, customer, anytime you want to go check on your production or your inventory or your quality, or you have a question about dimensions, anything, they may log into the beam to go visit the factory. So the CEO, this CEO thought the beam would be only used for his manufacturing kind of operational meetings, but instead he's using it as a sales tool.
Wow, that's awesome. As a way of building trust with people who can't be there, maybe, or
Yeah.
just can't see it or want to see it more often.
It's a convenience to the customer. Other people use it for tours of their tech centers. So instead of, they want to build a relationship with the customer, but they also understand that it's not a great use of a customer's time to take a couple days to fly to your facility to see it. That
Right.
might be a little more of an inconvenience, actually. So now people can use the beams in their tech centers or in their showcase rooms, and give customers walkthroughs remotely so they can build the trust, and it's all at the convenience of the customer.
I can imagine this. I mean, one of the major things that just keeps coming up, it sounds like, is it really saves in time for travel. People who need to
Mhm.
travel a lot or are traveling a lot, this is sort of a lifesaver.
Well, I think it's for people who need to be in two places at once. Some people do need to business travel, but they also have projects going on at headquarters. Some people are managing multiple facilities or teams across different cities. So instead of spending 50-50 time, half your life at home and your other half your life in a hotel room someplace else, you can actually operate all of those teams from one central hub, especially if it's recurring meetings, especially if it's people you are familiar with, but you feel the FaceTime is very valuable, or you need to be looking at a site or a thing or a place or like a factory. We feel strongly, and our customers feel strongly that now they can, beam into a place every day and see how the team's doing and manage multiple sites a lot more simply.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, the thing that the powerful thing about this is that it gives people a real presence wherever they are so that you can actually be there physically. And I think what struck me when I used the beam was how much people underestimated the importance of the movement and of the presence, that the person was able to move themselves and turn, and you had the sense that somebody was behind you if you were in the beam. There's that weird sense. So the idea of the engagement is so powerful, and I think it's really underestimated by most people, just that
And
movement.
that's why we really encourage people to try using Beam in order to test it out. So we offer test drives for people to zip the Beam and drive it around our office, me and my team see where the Beam is produced. But I will say this, we were able to pull some statistics recently. We have a feedback form on the user software where when people who wish to submit feedback about how they liked using the Beam or didn't like using the Beam, answer a couple of questions about how they felt about the experience. So it ranged from strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. And over the past year or so, I say maybe 18 months, we had like 650 responses on that. And I was very happy to look at that. Well, we number crunched it. And turns out 90% of people really enjoyed the Beam experience, agreed or strongly agreed. 86% would recommend it to a friend, which we love to hear, but 96% felt that the Beam was very easy to use. And that's something that was really rewarding for my engineering team to hear, because
Yeah.
we want the technology to be invisible. We don't want it to be cumbersome. We want it to be very simple so people can focus on the conversation they're having, on being with the people they need to be with, on being together and getting the job done, and not let the technology be a hindrance or a layer between them and an immersive experience in a remote location.
Right, I can imagine. I mean, one of the main things that actually comes up for people, I think, when I say, what do you dislike about remote working, is online meetings and conference calls. It's like the first layer of hell that Dante could have maybe designed. That would have been the conference call layer had it been around. I mean, people hate it. So, I mean, 96%, that's a huge win. So that does really say something.
I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true.
Right, you can't. You're on
I
camera.
was surprised too. I was like, wow, people think this is fun. And that's what a lot of people love, the experience. And that's why we have somewhat of an open test drive policy. If anybody wants to try a Beam, we're more than happy to show you how it works, show people
Okay,
how it works.
and we'll highlight your information on how to contact you at the end of the conversation for sure. But I mean, that does bring up something, because there is an issue, I think, with remote working because of all the tools and the technology. There is an issue of technical illiteracy, or at least tool burnout. People are completely burned out on how many tools they have to use for everything. So it does say something that the ease of use, but I'm wondering, what is the resistance then to, why are people resisting the beam if they are? I mean, I'm assuming some people thinks it's weird, or I don't know. What is the resistance?
I think I have gotten used to hearing people say it's creepy, but they never say that when they know the person who is on the beam.
Right.
So we try to focus our demonstrations on communities where people know who is on the beam. So we love getting beam up on stage with a familiar face. Ray Kurzweil did a talk on beam, and he was located in California, and he gave the talk in New York City, and that whole community know who Ray Kurzweil is.
Right.
Likewise, when it's their own friends or their own colleagues, the technology blends and it works out really well. Other hesitations were cost initially. The Beam Pro, our consumer enterprise version, is a 16,950, and that's because we didn't compromise on any of the components. It's robust, it works really well, it works in trade shows and loud environments, it can handle a beating, almost literally. But we just launched this year the Beam Plus unit, which is available for just under $2,000. And that's breaking a lot of barriers because $2,000 is something people are willing to roll the dice on, purchase, try out, play with. And the analogy between the two might be something compared to a bicycle and a car. The Beam Plus, great for home, great for smaller environments. It's appropriately sized for a living room. It works really well, and people are trying it out in their small business environments, which is also great. It'll work well for students who wish to go to school. But the Beam Pro, when you want, it is taller, little, bigger, faster, stronger. It is important to be a certain size and height and have your face be the same size as it normally will be in order to have that professional presence in the workplace. So the difference between the two are very experiential. Some people might have preferences on one over the other, but at least with Beam Plus, if people were curious about the concept to begin with, now they have something they can just buy and start using.
Cool. Super cool concept. So what do you like about it so much? What excites you about telepresence personally?
There's so many things. I've been in this industry for over 5 years. I was working at a different startup in 2010 when coincidentally my company at the time and two other companies, we basically launched this concept at the same time back in 2010. And that was really exciting. But what I love is what it can do to help people get the job they need or get the job they want, regardless of where they live. Imagine a world where not only from the company perspective, but let's say the stay-at-home mom or the employee perspective, or they love living in a certain community, but there's not as many jobs available. And because of the internet, because of remote work, there are certain types of jobs that are available that are knowledge-based, that are somewhat creative jobs. But there's a whole service industry that can't be served by the internet and distributed work that because it requires face-to-face interaction. So when thinking about new positions opening up, for example, sales reps in retail, product specialists in retail, imagine if you have a guy who's approaching retirement and he used to build kitchens. That was his full-time job. He used to build kitchens, a cabinet maker, loves what he does. Maybe now his back hurts and he's semi-retired, but he still wants to work. And then you have thousands of Home Depot locations across the entire country, those homes who really want to give their customers the best expert when they're standing beside a cabinet display and want to buy something. So imagine that scenario expanded across the entire world that, for example, a semi-retired cabinet maker living in Alaska can somewhat be on call or be available as a certain shift to log into and beam into any home improvement store in the country. And then that customer gets to be served with the best knowledge worker.
Right. And he gets to share his knowledge and do something that he loves and continue. Right.
It's a win-win, and he can still live in his house. He doesn't have to worry about his hurt back. He can have a job. Home Depot's customers can be happy. And that scenario can just sprawl across so many different use cases. I'm personally excited because at working for this company, I get a lot of flexibility. I worked from Italy last year. I get to travel next week. I'm going to a family reunion in Boston, and I'm going to work from there next week. So, and I get to work from home in my living room as well, and I can just beam into the office and participate in the office like normal. So kind of love the opportunities that it presents itself.
The freedom, it sounds like, that it gives you to do
It's
the things you want.
it's freedom. I want to be there for work, but sometimes I need to have my body sitting someplace else.
Sure, for those that love to travel, for example, I mean, you can do a work holiday in Italy, like you said, and be
Hmm.
able to also work at the same time and hang out in Italy for a little while. So it sounds like that could be ideal. Interesting. So are there personality types that are more suitable for the beam? Like, for example, when I beamed into the conference Infocom last year, I beamed in with a friend of mine, and we just went around and we're talking with people. And I thought it felt a little bit intimidating the first time I beamed in, and it took a bit of an extroverted nature to sort of, as we were rolling down the halls and people were, I mean, I'm sure because there's two women in robots roaming the halls, and I'm sure that, that's also attractive and appealing, to talk to people like that. So, but I did feel like it took a certain extroverted nature. Is that the case, or?
Not really. Kind of depends on where you're beaming into. So you beamed into Infocom, and so the way my company does trade shows for the listeners is we may fly one or two people in the flesh to work the booth. I'm usually there just making sure the Wi-Fi runs and stays up and everything's plugged in. But we have 8 beams, and we have sales reps who live all around the country log into the beams and give the product demos on the floor, even though they might be sitting in their respective homes. So last week we were at Infocom, and we had beam pilots from California, Utah, New York, and they were all logged into the devices and talking to people on the floor. So when you logged into a device, you were somewhat part of our showcase, and people were
Right.
probably expecting you to talk about the product. However, if you were to log into an event as an attendee, for example, we just started a subsidiary called Event Presence. And Event Presence has beams permanently installed in convention centers. The first 2 convention centers are Santa Clara Convention Center and Vancouver Convention Center. So 2 weeks ago, there was this conference called Augmented Reality World. They sold registration tickets for people to beam into the trade show portion for an hour or two. Also had reporters beam in. I think they had over 60 people log into the beams to attend the show. So if you're an attendee at a show where you're not being presented as the product people want to learn about, you have more freedom to look at things, ask questions, and and be yourself. In the office here, if you're using a beam to go to in the office, you can be exactly the same personality that you are already, because people are already familiar with beam and they're more interested in
Right.
being familiar with you. But like with all my colleagues, I basically talk to them as much or as little as I would if they're sitting here in the flesh. But it's nice to know that they're readily available if I have a question.
Right, it makes for really easy pair collaboration amongst anybody. It's like as if you were in the office. I mean, if everybody's just beaming around. Super interesting. And I like the idea of you guys having lunch together too. Sort of this
Well, that
virtual.
was actually the startup called Human in San Francisco. So Human, this contact manager app for iPhone, they have a no conference call policy now. Basically, if people need to meet and some people are remote, don't use the conference phone. Nobody likes it. Actually, I
Right.
love that YouTube video, a conference call in real life.
Oh yeah.
That's just being able to see and hear each other, but mostly, and being able to turn left or right so people can see who you're focusing on, brings you into the room so much more easily. So Human, they insist that if you need to call into a meeting, that you're going to be calling into a beam and joining that meeting face to face.
Awesome. I love it. I always insist in my video meetings to use video whenever possible, just to have the sight. And if I
Yeah.
could, I would also have the movement when possible, just so that people have that experience, because I think it enhances things that much more. I mean,
It's great for field of view across a room. So if there are a couple of remote people to a room where there's 5 or 10 people, Then you can go side to side. You can look at everyone who's talking, and also you're a peer within the whole group. So if there's a room system on the wall and you have one person logging in, there might be almost too much attention focused on the person on the screen or too little. And it's really hard to
Right.
nudge yourself into a seat at the table when you're on a static room system. Whereas the beam really feels like a seat at the table. You are also at the table like everybody else, fully participating as if you're sitting there in the flesh. And as mentioned by those survey results, people are enjoying that experience.
I can imagine. Yeah. I interviewed one guy and he said they tried to hang out and have virtual lunch together, but he was being projected as a huge face on the screen, and he always felt like he was on stage, and he didn't
Yeah.
want to eat while he's, because he's on a huge screen where everybody can see everything. So it just didn't work because of that. So you're right about that. I love it.
And it might be somewhat unintentional, but the somewhat goofiness or little funniness of Beam kind of brings down the formality to probably the level that you would want to have you around your colleagues. Like, you
Awesome.
are in the Beam, you are being proactive, you are being present. But if you go at the table and do a 360, you're just going to get everybody in the room kind of laughing along, and that way you can be part of the room, and it's a pure group, and focus on the team and what you need to do.
Yeah, I can imagine it really opens up a whole new brand of office humor too. I mean, it's wigs and hats and ties, I imagine, all
We
kinds of things.
we let our customers do that. A bunch of photos get leaked out on the internet. For example, I think a guy from Google a remote employee at Google was passing along some bullet bourbon on a tray fastened to the beam. So he was serving everyone drinks. And we see little bits of clothing like neckties, hats, and people who what we suggest, if one person is using the beam all the time, the beam represents the person, not itself. So if you dress up the beam in a certain way and then you have 10 different people using it, that's not the personality of the person on the beam. That's kind of
Right.
giving the beam a personality. Whereas in our ideal world, we want the beam to be invisible. We want the technology to be invisible. If we could create a walking lifelike hologram, that would be basically our goal for the kind of experience we want to achieve. Right
Right.
now, we're limited with having a video screen and a plastic casing with wheels. And the design intent is to keep the social norms as they are, as people would expect, and have the technology disappear so it's the person and the face. We've done a lot of demos. For one of the more known ones is Ed Snowden used it to give a TED Talk. And here's somebody who's giving a very serious TED Talk about a serious topic. And he wants to be presented as professional and respectable, but
Right.
he did not want to be presented as an 18-foot tall head above the stage either. That being projected on a large screen, it doesn't really give intimacy with the audience. So he used the beam to roll out on the stage next to Chris Anderson to give his talk about the state of the internet. And he felt the beam was a really good tool for him. And also, the nice thing was he was able to fully participate in the TED activities afterwards. He went to the networking receptions. He rolled around all the halls. There's
Right.
more photos of him talking to people amongst the crowd. And it was his way to fully participate in a TED in Vancouver when he had to stay in Russia.
Right. Very liberating, I can imagine, to have a real presence somewhere like that and to
Yeah.
really be able to interact with people. Yeah. Awesome. Just awesome. So, just really quickly, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, I wanted to ask about, it says fire spinning and hang gliding, and you don't see those every day on people's LinkedIn profiles. So I wanted to give the opportunity.
Well, it's
Talk
a
about
benefit of San Francisco that most people you work with, or most people who want to get to know you. I've worked at several startups in San Francisco, and people somewhat connect on the random fun things that you do. So yeah, I used to be a hang glider pilot. I flew a few years ago, and fire spinning something picked up recently, and it's a lot of fun to hear the whoosh of the fire go by your ear.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. They've nicknamed me Le Klutz, so I stay away from fire and things with velocity. So the beam is actually a good speed for me.
And
So
you can adjust the speed too. Have you done the turbo speed with the shift key? And oh yeah.
yeah. Even the turbo speed, you have to get used to it. But I can imagine if you have a long hallway to go down and you need to be somewhere a little bit faster, then that would be very handy.
Yeah, once you just, the beam has these blue lines that act as visual aids. And so what we love doing is pointing them down a hallway and trying to go as fast down that hallway as possible. But I find it nice that the beam drives at a typical walking speed, like probably like over 2 miles an hour. And that way, when I'm trying to go down a long hallway, like I actually took the beams on a tour through Infocom last week, I can walk my normal pace and the beam's keeping up with me, and we can just all go on our way.
I love the simulation of the presence and trying to make it as human-like as possible, given the restrictions, which I can imagine given the cost. I mean, if you're trying to sell this on the market, you can't have, a super expensive lifelike replica robot. It's just not going to work. We have to, so there's limitations there. But I think people really, I'm a huge fan of telepresence, as most everybody that follows me knows. So I'm super excited about this kind of technology. And I think I get more excited than most people, but I really think if they just tried it, they would understand. Like they would understand how exciting the movement and the presence really is. So anyway, I'm very excited. I'm personally very excited about this. But I want to encourage.
I'm excited too. It's gaining traction. Last week was our third Infocom, and the first one we went to, people were wondering, what is this thing? Second one, last year, they're looking for more validation. This year, because we've been out, we've had big customers. We have customers who tell their friends they love it, and the word of mouth is getting out that the trade-offs between being easy to use and what it is has been a nice balance on our engineering side. And it's exciting that we can change the world and help change the world a little bit by giving everybody access to different types of jobs or locations, giving people with disabilities access to their communities and museums, and giving them a chance to engage with their world as well. So it's been really rewarding.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. I think it's super exciting. The opportunities are completely over the top. And I think for anybody that has questions or want to know more, please, you can always tweet now or in the future to #remote-interview. And Erin, if people want to learn more about you and the beam and get in contact for a robot tour, you must do it, everybody. Get in contact. So where do they find you?
Suitabletech.com. That's SUITABLETECH.com. Or what might be easier is #BEAM, BEAM. On any social media network, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We've been posting under that hashtag, and you'll see photos of people on beams interacting with each other. And then that'll help you link back to our website.
Awesome. Super exciting. So is there anything that I missed today that I should have asked if people want to know about telepresence?
I think we covered a fair amount. I just want to reiterate that it's a technology worth experiencing. What we found is people really need to experience it in order to understand its potential. But as more people are using it, as you mentioned, 6 students, I talked about, there's this one woman who is bedridden in Maryland, and she's getting her computer science degree in robotics.
Cool.
And her research goal is to create better technologies for herself to help her live a better life. And she's in Maryland, and I get invited to some robotics things in San Francisco. And so I've just been bringing the beam with me to these events and inviting her. And she's been meeting more people in her community, research collaborators, other companies who can sponsor her work out here on the West Coast, because the beam has given her the ability to virtually leave her bedroom when her body wouldn't really let her do that.
Awesome.
So knowing that we can all expand this capability out across the world, and the technology is here, I'd say let's get excited and let's start using beam.
Yeah, think of the great things we can do together and the advancement of evolution just based on getting the right people together. Totally awesome.
Mm-hmm. Advancement of ideas, it's gonna be great.
Yeah, totally awesome. I think you guys are really changing the world for the better. So I hope that people get in contact. All right, well, we'll end it here. And until next time, everybody, be powerful.